The hand is what stops her. 7:15 in the morning, 12 below freezing, and Chloe Hale is hauling the last bag of trash out behind Hollis' house when she sees it, a hand, palm up, resting in the garbage like it's waiting for something. And the nails are clean, trimmed, filed. Chloe stands in the gray light with her breath hanging in the air and thinks the strangest thought of her 27 years. Dead men don't have nails like that. Dead men don't have anybody who cares enough. She's got 9 minutes. 9. At 7:24, the head housekeeper checks the staff list, and a third late mark this month means she's gone. So she should walk. Any sane woman would walk. Instead, she climbs onto the rim of that dumpster in her thin coat and her $12 shoes. He's lying on his back. That's the thing that gets under her skin. Nobody's in a dumpster on their back. People get thrown in, and they land the way trash lands, folded, face down, ashamed. But this man turned himself over. Somewhere in that long, freezing night, bleeding alone, he spent the last of what he had, choosing how he'd be found. Face to the sky, then his eyes open, gray. Oops, gray. Wet metal gray. And they don't beg her for anything. They don't even ask. They just take her in the uniform, the chapped hands, the way she's already shrinking without meaning to, and Chloe understands, with a cold drop in her stomach, that she isn't the one deciding here. He is. He's lying in garbage with his blood gone black on his shirt, and he's deciding whether she's worth staying alive for. You're going to call the police, he says. It isn't a college, and when she nods, he tells her calm as a weather report that if she calls, he'll be dead before they arrive. If she walks away, he'll be dead too. She's got about 3 seconds to decide what kind of person she is. Chloe Hale has spent 5 years being invisible. It's her job. She's a woman who practices saying, "No thank you," to a bathroom mirror and still can't manage it out loud. She's never once been the most important person in any room she's ever stood in. And in 3 seconds, in an alley behind a house that isn't hers, cleaning up a mess that isn't hers, she's about to make the only decision that'll ever matter. What she doesn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, kneeling in the filth with her heart slamming against her ribs, is who she's about to bring home. If a story about being truly seen is worth your time, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to this channel. Thank you for being here. Now let's go back to that alley, back to 7:15 in the morning, and find out what Chloe Hale decided. I'm the kind of person who will regret it, she heard herself say, and 3 seconds passed, and there was no turning back. He didn't answer. He only closed his eyes for a moment, as though that was the answer he'd been waiting for. Chloe climbed down, her feet slipping on the ice beneath the soles of her $12 shoes, and she understood at once that she had miscalculated. He was bigger than she had thought. Not big in the sense of being fat, big in the bones, broad shoulders, a long frame, and when she slipped her arms beneath his armpits to pull him, she felt the full weight of that cold truth pressing down on her wrists. 194 pounds. She weighed 115. She knew her own number because the doctor at the community clinic had reminded her 3 times that she needed to gain weight. She pulled. Nothing moved. She changed position, braced her feet against the metal wall, and pulled again. This time, he slid about 4 inches, and the sound of his breathing changed, wet, shorter. Chloe stopped, her heart pounding in her throat, and then she remembered the laundry cart. It stood just inside the service entrance. The steel-framed cart with squeaking wheels that she had pushed twice a day for 5 years, piled high with the bed linens of people who had never known her name. She ran to get it, pushed it close, lowered the side as far as it would go. Then she turned back and began the worst work of her life. She managed to pull his shoulders onto the edge. The rest of his body followed, slowly, heavily, refusing to cooperate. He tried to help, she realized, one hand gripping the side of the cart, one weak push from his legs. And it was that effort that made her want to cry. He was spending something he no longer had. When he was almost inside the cart, he lost consciousness. There was nothing dramatic about it, no sound. It simply changed its nature, from a man trying to stay alive into an object obeying gravity, and Chloe nearly lost him onto the concrete floor. She seized his coat with both hands, leaning her whole body backward, and she held on. She stood there for 30 seconds, trembling so violently that both her hands would ache for an entire week afterward because of that desperate grip. Then she pulled the rest of him in. He lay folded inside the cart like something someone had thrown away. She covered him with bed sheets. 4 layers. Then she pushed. The wheels over the ice. She went around through the service passage, through the basement door, down the concrete ramp she had walked thousands of times, and not one person inside that house knew she existed. And for the first time in 5 years, she was grateful for it. The basement of Hollis' house was 30 degrees warmer than the air outside. She pushed the cart into the corner behind the boiler, into the space between the old water tank and the brick wall, a place no one entered except the plumber and her. She lowered the side of the cart, pulled him down onto the floor, and this time she let gravity do the work, and the sound of his body striking the concrete made her wince. He didn't wake. She opened his coat. His shirt had once been white. Now it had hardened into something she didn't want to name. 3 holes. She had seen them in the alley, but here, beneath the overhead bulb, they were more real. She had no gauze. She had a cart filled with clean towels. She folded 4 of them into thick pads, pressed them against the wounds, then removed her apron and tied it around his body to hold them in place, knotting it at his side and pulling it until it saw his throat, and she had to bite her lip to keep pulling. His left hand was still clenched. She had forgotten. All that way, through the snow, down the slope, inside the cart, he still hadn't released the cassette recorder. She bent down and tried to take it from him, but it wouldn't come free. His fingers were locked around it, stiff and cold, and she had to loosen them one at a time. The little finger first, then the ring finger. She worked slowly, afraid she might break something, and as she pried open his index finger, she saw it, a thick callus on the second knuckle, in a place where a man who held a pen wouldn't have one, in a place where a homeless man wouldn't have one. She didn't allow herself to think about it. She took the recorder, slipped it into her pocket, and her hands were shaking so badly that it took 3 tries. Then she looked at him, lying on the concrete floor behind the boiler. No blanket, no pillow. Blood had already begun soaking through the towels. She looked at the clock on the wall. 3 hours and 50 minutes remained before the end of her shift. 3 hours and 50 minutes during which he would have to stay alive alone. Down here was a mother upstairs wiping a bathroom mirror for a man she had never met. She knelt. She placed 2 fingers against his neck. There it was. Weak but there. And Chloe Hale, the woman who hadn't dared say no to a bathroom mirror, bent close to the dying man's ear and spoke the only promise she could make. "I'll come back." Then she stood, straightened her uniform, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and climbed the stairs to begin her shift. The medicine cabinet stood in the second-floor hallway, between the sitting room and the back staircase, and Chloe knew it better than anyone else in the house because she was the one who cleaned it. Winston Ashgrove's gout medicine sat on the top shelf, 3 bottles arranged with their labels facing outward like merchandise in a store. Below them was what she needed. She still stood before the open cabinet and did what she always did when she was afraid. She calculated. 4 packets of sterile gauze, 1 bottle of betadine, 1 unopened suture kit, $60. She knew the number because 2 months earlier, she had stood inside the Walgreens on Broadway Street and added up the cost of these exact things for her mother, then placed every one of them back on the shelf. $60. That was the amount. It wasn't the price. The price was this. Stealing the homeowner's property meant immediate dismissal without warning, and Perry Lund wouldn't need to call the police because he never needed to call anyone. Being fired meant no letter of recommendation. No letter of recommendation meant no house on the east side of the city would hire her, because all of them called one another. No job meant her mother lost $1,900 a month, and her mother losing $1,900 a month meant the seizures would return. And Chloe had witnessed one once, only once, and she would never forget the sound the hospital bed had made. She took the 4 packets of gauze. She took the bottle of betadine. She took the suture kit, and then she stood there. She didn't move. Later, when she looked back, she counted about 8 seconds. 8 seconds in which she thought about a man lying on a concrete floor with 3 holes in his body and 4 cleaning cloths pressed against them. Then she reached up and took 2 more packets of gauze. She closed the cabinet. She stuffed everything into the pocket of her spare apron and went down the back stairs, and she didn't run because people who ran were people who got noticed. At exactly 7:24, Perry Lund's voice carried through the first-floor hallway. Hale. He called her name exactly the way he always did, from somewhere she couldn't see, without raising his voice, without adding anything else. In 5 years, he had never called her Chloe. In 5 years, he had never looked directly into her face for longer than took to confirm that she still existed. Yes, she answered from the laundry room, and this was what sent a chill down her spine for weeks afterward. Not the man in the basement, not the blood, but this. Her voice was steady, it didn't stumble. It didn't rise at the end the way it always did. The Perry Stead, have you signed it? Yes, sir. At 7:15 she heard his pen. She heard his footsteps moving away, and Chloe stood among the stacks of bed linens with $60 worth of stolen supplies in her apron pocket and realized that she had just lied, smoothly and without hesitation, for the first time in her life, and that it had been easy, and that she didn't know what to think about the fact that it had been easy. She worked her shift. She cleaned 4 bathrooms. She replaced the walls in the primary bedroom, where Winston Ashgrove slept, and where she had never once met him. She vacuumed the staircase. She polished the brass doorknobs along the hallway, 32 of them, and she counted them as she did every day. And all 32 times she thought about the boiler and wondered whether that breathing was still there. She didn't go downstairs. She wasn't permitted to go down outside her schedule, and one deviation from routine in a house like this became a question, and one question meant the end. At 10:30, she began gathering the laundry. At 10:50, she pushed the cart down the concrete ramp. He was still there. His eyes were closed. The cleaning cloths had changed color, but when she knelt and placed 2 fingers against his neck, it was still there, that weak, stubborn pulse, and Chloe released a breath she hadn't known she had been holding for 3 hours. Getting him into the cart a second time was worse than the first, because this time he couldn't help her at all, and because her back had already been damaged since morning. She managed it. She didn't know how. She covered him with bed linens, 9 layers, piled all the way to the rim of the cart, then placed 2 bags of dirty laundry on top so it looked exactly as it did every other day. At 11:05, she pushed the cart out through the side gate. The wheels squeaked over the ice. The guard in the booth didn't look up. He never looked up. For 5 years, her invisibility had been the thing that made her feel smaller with every passing day. And that morning, it was the only thing keeping a man alive. And Chloe Hale pushed 194 pounds of truth through the gates of the Ashgrove estate in broad daylight, without a single person in the world seeing her do it. The road from Hollis House to Olneyville was 1.5 miles long, and Chloe covered every inch of it by refusing to think about anything at all. She pushed the cart through streets where no one paid attention to a maid hauling laundry, across the bridge, past the row of abandoned textile mills that had become nothing more than hollow blocks of brick. But the true nightmare began stairs. He was too heavy and she was too weak. In a desperate bit of survival, she used the strong cotton bed sheets from the cart, knotting them into a crude, thick harness around his chest and looping it over her own shoulders so she could use her entire body weight to pull. The agonizing pain must have roused him, because halfway up, Silver opened his eyes. He didn't speak, but understanding the stakes, he began using his one uninjured leg to shove against the wooden steps, timing his efforts with her agonizing tugs. Together, inch by brutal inch, they conquered the 22 steps. It took them nearly 40 agonizing minutes. With every step, the coarse cotton sheets bit into her shoulders, threatening to tear her skin, while her lungs burned as if filled with broken glass. Her knees buckled twice, and for a terrifying second, she thought they would both tumble backward into the dark stairwell. But she bit her lip until it bled and kept pulling. By the time they reached the top landing, she collapsed against her door and laughed, a dry, deranged sound, knowing that if Mrs. Audley Frank in apartment 2C opened her door at that moment, everything would be over. Mrs. Frank didn't open her door. Chloe dragged him into the living room and placed him on the mattress she had pulled from her bed onto the floor, because she wasn't strong enough to lift him onto the bed, and because the floor was closer. Her apartment had 2 rooms and a small kitchen, and the walls were so thin that she knew which television program the neighbors were watching. The radiator rattled like an old man coughing. She untied the apron wrapped around his body, and the cleaning cloths fell away, and she saw the work waiting for her. 3 holes. 1 beneath his left collarbone, 1 in his side, 1 in his thigh on the outside, and that one was the least terrible, she thought, though she didn't know enough to be thinking anything of the kind. She washed her hands in water so hot that her skin turned red. Then she laid everything out on a clean towel, 6 packets of gauze, the bottle of betadine, the suture kit, and she sat beside the matrices and did what she had learned during 3 years of caring for a woman the hospital had sent home before she was ready. She knew how to treat pressure sores. She knew how to stitch a wound when the emergency room charged $2,000 to do it. She knew how to keep her hands from trembling when something needed to be sewn back together. She poured the betadine, she cleaned the wounds, she threaded the needle, and the man on the mattress didn't make a single sound. He didn't groan, he didn't gasp, he didn't flinch. She placed 3 stitches in the wound beneath his collarbone, and at one point she stopped and looked at his face to make certain he was still alive, and his eyes remained closed, and his jaw wasn't clenched, and there was nothing off in his face at all. Chloe realized that she would have felt better if he had screamed. People screamed. That was what people did. This silence wasn't endurance. It was something that had been trained into him, and she didn't want to know who had trained it. She finished stitching him shortly before 1 o'clock in the afternoon. 9 stitches in his side, 4 in his thigh. She bandaged the wounds. She pulled a blanket over him, then sat with her back against the opposite wall and watched him breathe. And that was when the fear arrived. Right on time, late and overwhelming, the way it always came to her. People didn't get shot 3 times for doing nothing. People didn't get thrown into a millionaire's house because they had lost their way. She was sitting inside her own locked apartment with a man she had stolen to save, and she knew nothing about him except that he didn't cry out while being stitched. She stood to get the telephone. "The door is behind you." She turned, and his eyes were open. He didn't move. He couldn't move. But he had watched her long enough to read every part of that realization on her face. "No," he said. "I'm sorry. The door is behind me. From where you're standing, I'm between you and it." He spoke slowly, each word costing him something. "I want you to know that I can't sit up. I can't stand. If you walk through that door now, there's nothing I can do. I only want you to know that before you decide. Because I think you're deciding." Chloe stood there with the telephone in her hand, and she didn't know what to do with a man who had just explained exactly how she could abandon him. Dangerous men didn't do that. Surely dangerous men didn't do that. She set the telephone on the table. She sat on the edge of the chair, nearly 6.5 feet away, and asked the question she had meant to ask him in the alley. "What's your name?" He stared at the ceiling for a long time. The radiator coughed. The neighbors changed the channel. "Call me anything you like," he said at last. "My name won't help you." And Chloe, sitting on the edge of her own chair inside her own apartment, understood that it wasn't a refusal. It was a warning. "You'd need to go to a hospital," Chloe said. Once she had been sitting long enough for her heart to slow down. "I stitched you with thread taken from someone else's medicine cabinet. I'm not a doctor. You could get an infection. You could die here, and I'd be the one who found you." He said nothing for a while. Then he turned his head toward her, slowly, as though even the movement of his neck came at a cost. "Hospitals are required to report gunshot wounds," he said. "That's the law, in every state. A doctor sees a bullet hole. The doctor calls the police. The police file a report, and that report becomes a file system that a great many people can read. Within 2 hours of my walking into an emergency room, the person who shot me would know I was still alive." He let the sentence rest between them. "Then they'd know who brought me in." Chloe said nothing. She thought about the name tag pinned to the chest of her uniform. "So if you take me," he said, "don't use your real name either." She stood and went into the kitchen because she needed a wall between herself and those words. She put water on to boil. She stood watching the kettle and called back to him, her voice quieter than she wanted it to be. "Who shot you?" "I don't know." "You don't remember their faces?" "I don't remember anything." She turned around, and he was staring at the ceiling. "I know how to stitch a wound," he said. "I know how far away those 3 shots were fired from. I know you're worried about infection, and you should be. I know those things. I don't know where I learned them. I don't know my name. I don't know whether I have a family. I don't know where I was going last night." He paused. "I was struck in the head before I was shot, at the base of my skull. You can feel it if you touch there." Chloe didn't touch him. She sat down on the edge of the chair again. "They call it retrograde amnesia," he said. "You lose your biography. You keep your skills. The brain doesn't store those things in the same place." He said it as calmly as a man reading the label on a medicine bottle, and Chloe didn't know which was stranger, that he couldn't remember his own name, or that he knew the vertical term for not remembering his own name. She brought him tea in the chipped cup. He managed 3 sips before he fell asleep. She sat on the floor beside her bookshelf and watched him breathe. That shelf held everything she owned that could be called in culture, bought at the flea market on Chalkstone Street. 3 books for $1. When he woke again, close to evening, he was alert enough to turn his head and look at it. He looked for quite a while. Treasure Island, he said. Chloe followed his gaze. The blue spine had faded with age. You've read it? I think so, he frowned. And it was the first time all day that anything had happened on that face. I remember someone in it. The man with one leg. He betrays everyone in the book. But he keeps his word to the boy, close he sat very still. Long John Silver, she said. Silver, he repeated. She didn't know why she said what came next. The words simply left at her mouth. Then you're Silver. He turned his head and looked at her, and something very faint passed over the corner of his mouth. A medal, he said. Makes sense. Then someone knocked at the door. Chloe sprang to her feet as though she had been shocked, and when she opened it, Mrs. Audley Frank from apartment 2C was standing in the hallway in her nightgown and slippers, her arms folded across at her chest. Miss? She said. I've misplaced my keys. I was going downstairs to get some milk. 7 o'clock in the evening. 14 degrees outside. Mrs. Frank, you're wearing your nightgown. The old woman looked down at herself and appeared genuinely surprised. Chloe walked her home, found the keys in the knife drawer, exactly where they had been the week before, and closed the door behind her. It was the 4th time that week. When Chloe returned, Silver had managed to prop himself up a few inches on one elbow. His face drained white from the effort, and he was lifting his chin toward the hallway. There's a smell, he said. Chloe breathed in. Dust, the radiator. The damp scent of a building 100 years old. What smell? He remained still for another moment, then shook his head and let himself fall back onto the mattress. Nothing. She stood there in the middle of her room, looking at the man she had just finished naming. You can stay, she said. He didn't answer. Only until you can walk. On the 2nd day, he managed to sit up. On the 3rd, he stood with one hand braced against the wall, and it took him 4 minutes to walk from the mattress to the window. When Chloe came home that afternoon, the blanket she had left on the mattress had been folded. She stood looking at it longer than necessary. It hadn't been folded carelessly. Square corners, the edge straight as a ruled line, the 2 diagonal ends matched to the fraction of an inch, and it had been placed at the foot of the mattress rather than in the middle. Chloe had folded blankets all her life, and she had never folded one like that. She didn't ask. She cooked. She took out a package of chicken breasts she had bought at the discount market on Manton Street. The kind sealed inside a thick plastic tray, and Silver sat in the chair watching her open it. Without meaning anything by it, he said, This has been injected with salt water. Chloe stopped moving. How do you know? The grain of the meat. It's separating here. He pointed with his chin because his left arm was still in a sling. They inject solution into it to increase the weight. You're paying for water. When he finished speaking, he fell silent, and his face took on the expression Chloe's beginning to recognize, the look of a man who had just heard himself say something he hadn't known he knew. She cooked the salt water and decadent chicken, and he ate every bite. He ate everything she cooked. The next morning, she handed him instant coffee in the chipped cup, and he took it, drank it all, and thanked her. But Chloe was standing right there. She saw it, half a second, perhaps less, between the moment she held out the cup and the moment his fingers closed around it. A hesitation so slight that she would have missed it if she had blinked. Then he drank without saying a word. She thought about it through her entire shift. On the 4th day, she came home and found him standing in the kitchen, and without thinking, she called out, Silver, have you seen? And stopped because he had turned his head. Slowly, very slowly, so slowly that the temperature in the room seemed to change. Don't, he said. Chloe stood frozen with the ring of keys in her hand. I know. His voice wasn't loud. It was never loud. Don't call me by that name. Why? He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked out the window. It sounds too much like a name I used to hear. The last person who called me something like that was my father. He said nothing more. He didn't explain. He didn't tell a story. He simply turned back to the drawer he had been opening, and Chloe understood that the next question wouldn't be answered. She also understood that he had just remembered something he hadn't remembered 3 days earlier, and neither of them spoke about it. Then she looked down at the dining table. Her stack of bills, the stack she kept shoved into a drawer because she couldn't bear to look at it, was lying on the tabletop. It had been divided into 4 piles. "Did you touch these?" she said. He turned around. "Who gave you the right to touch my papers?" Her voice broke in the middle. It rose and trembled and sounded like the voice of someone trying to do something for the first time. "Those are mine. That's my business. You've been lying on my floor for 4 days, and you think you have the right." She ran out of breath. She stood there with heat burning across her face, her hands shaking, horrified by herself. Silver didn't move. He didn't apologize. "You're paying the credit card with 6% interest first," he said, "and you're letting the one at 24% keep running. You make the minimum payment every month, and the balance grows. You're paying money to owe more." He tapped a finger against the second pile. "This is the hospital bill. It doesn't charge interest. It can wait, the third pile. This is the rent. It never waits." He looked up. 6 months from now, you'll lose this apartment. Not because you can't afford it, because you're paying things in the wrong order." Chloe stood in the middle of her own kitchen and couldn't find a single word. Homeless men didn't understand compound interest. Homeless men didn't look at a stack of papers for 4 minutes and see 6 months into another person's future. "Who are you?" she asked. And he looked at her, and this time he didn't turn away. "I don't know," he said. "But there's one thing I know for certain." He let it rest there for a moment. "I'm not a good man. Good men don't remember the things I remember." On Thursday afternoon, she went to visit her mother, because Thursday was the day she always went, and because she needed to get out of that apartment. St. Brendan Nursing Center stood at the end of Chalkstone Street. 3 stories of red brick, the smell of bleach laid over another smell that bleach could never quite conceal. Nadine Hale was in room 214, in the bed by the window, and she had been there for 3 years. Dr. Halloran stopped Chloe in the hallway before she could go inside. He was a kind man, and that was the worst thing about him. "Chloe, I need to talk to you about the prescription." She knew this part. She had heard it 4 times. "The insurance company is still refusing to cover the brand name medication. Your mother can't tolerate the generic version. You remember what happened in September?" She remembered September. "So it's still $1,900 a month. Cash." Chloe nodded. He hesitated, then said what he always said, because he was a kind man, and kind people needed to feel that they had tried. "I submitted the Medicaid application again. They denied it again. Chloe, your income is $2,400 a month. The state limit is $1,732. He shrugged, a helpless little movement. "If you earned less, your mother's care would be covered in full. If you earned more, you could afford private insurance. You're in the middle." "There's nothing in the middle." Chloe thanked him. She always thanked him. $668, she thought as she walked down the hallway. That was the distance. She earned $668 a month above the limit, and because of that, her mother didn't exist to the state of Rhode Island. She was a number in the wrong column of a spreadsheet no one had ever read. Chloe pushed open the door, 214. Her mother was looking out the window. The right half of her body did nothing at all, and hadn't since 3 years earlier, since the morning Chloe had found her on the kitchen floor. But the left side could still turn, and it turned, and Nadine Hale saw her daughter, and her face changed. "Hi, Mom." Chloe pulled the chair closer. Her mother opened her mouth. 3 seconds passed before the first sound came. 3 seconds. You. 3 seconds. Eat. Every word was a mountain she had to climb. Chloe took her mother's left hand. "I ate, Mom. I ate at home last night. I cooked chicken." It was the truth, and it was also a lie, because she had cooked chicken, and she had given almost all of it to a nameless man lying on the floor of her apartment, while she ate rice with soy sauce at 11 o'clock that night. Nadine said nothing. She only looked at her daughter. That gaze traveled from Chloe's cheekbones down to Chloe's wrists, then back to Chloe's eyes, and Chloe wanted to turn away, but she couldn't. 3 years with half her body paralyzed, and she could still see. She had always been able to see. "I'm fine, Mom," Chloe said. Dean squeezed her hand, very weakly. Then she began to speak, and Chloe saw how much it cost her, and she knew she mustn't interrupt. "Don't 3 seconds. Let 3 seconds, them 3 seconds. Make 3 seconds, you. 3 seconds. Small, 3 seconds." Again, Chloe sat perfectly still. Outside the window, there was a bare tree and a parking lot and nothing else. "I know," she said. But she didn't know. For 5 years, she had walked through hallways where no one called her name, and every day she had made herself a little smaller, until she fit perfectly inside the space people had left for her, and she couldn't remember when she had begun doing it. She stayed another 40 minutes. She brushed her mother's hair. She talked about the weather. She didn't tell her about the man in her apartment. By the time she left, it was dark, and she walked because the bus cost $2. At the corner, she stopped and took the cassette recorder from her coat pocket. The machine-sense fingers had clutched through an entire freezing night, and she put on the headphones. The tape began to play. There was the sound of pots and pans, the sound of running water, then her mother's voice, her real voice, the voice from before, quick and warm, a whole sentence flowing out in a single breath without needing 3 seconds for any part of it. "Chloe, remember to turn the heat down low. I mean it. Just 5 minutes. Then switch it off." Chloe stood on the corner of Chongston Street in 14-degree weather, listening to that woman call her name. She rewound the tape. She listened again. Then she slipped the recorder back into her pocket and walked home. And inside the drawer of her dining table, beneath the stack of bills a stranger had just divided into 4 piles, there was a document for $40,000, signed 5 years earlier, with her signature at the bottom and the name Ashgrove at the top. At 3 o'clock in the morning, a hand touched her shoulder, and Chloe woke with her heart pounding in her ears. Silver was standing beside her bed. He could stand, that was the first thing she thought. He could stand, and he was inside her room, and she had been foolish. She had been foolish for 4 straight days. "Get out of the building," he said. Now she opened her mouth, and he had already turned away. He didn't explain. He didn't wait. He stepped into the hallway with one hand against the wall, and Chloe snatched up her coat and ran after him because she didn't know what else to do. The hallway was completely dark. The automatic lights didn't come on. Silver stopped outside apartment 2C, bent down until his face was close to the gap beneath the door, and Chloe saw him draw one short breath. Then he stepped back half a pace. "Mrs. Frank," he called, not loudly. He knocked twice. Nothing. He didn't knock a third time. He kicked the door just beneath the lock once, and it flew open with the sound of splintering wood, and Chloe cried out because the 3 bullet holes in his body weren't even 6 days old. Then the smell rushed out. Chloe breathed in once, and pain immediately closed around her head, a tight band around her temples, and she staggered. Silver was already inside. He didn't turn on the light. Chloe understood why about 1 second later, and cold spread through her entire body. He went straight into the kitchen, knelt in front of the old gas stove, reached behind it for the valve, and turned it, and Chloe heard the faint hiss stop. Then he stood and opened the window above the sink, then the living room window. Then he walked past Chloe and opened both hallway windows, and 14-degree air blew straight inside, and she could breathe again. Mrs. Audley Frank was lying on the sofa. She was wearing her nightgown. The television was muted, glowing blue. She didn't wake when Silver touched her, and he didn't shake her. He simply slipped one arm beneath her back and the other beneath her knees and lifted her, and Chloe watched it happen, and she saw the price of it too, the way his face went white, the way his left shoulder didn't work properly, the way he rose using his right leg because there were 4 stitches in his left thigh. He carried her into the hallway, down the stairs, out onto the sidewalk. Chloe ran after him with the blanket she had torn from the chair, wrapped it around the old woman, and Silver lowered her onto the front steps, then collapsed beside her and couldn't speak for nearly a minute. Chloe checked the time on her phone later and calculated it. So from the moment he kicked in the door to the moment the old woman was outside in the open air, fewer than 90 seconds had passed. Mrs. Frank woke on the sidewalk. She looked around and said, "Good Lord, am I wearing my nightgown again?" And Chloe let out a laugh with no joy in it at all. They sat there for 40 minutes, the 3 of them on the steps, while the wind swept through the entire 2nd floor. Chloe didn't call the fire department. She didn't ask herself why she hadn't called. She already knew the answer, and the fact that she knew it frightened her more than the smell had. After she had wrapped Mrs. Frank securely in the blanket and sat down beside Silver, she asked, "How did you know?" "I smelled it. I've lived here for 3 years. I didn't smell anything." Silver rested his head against the railing. His breathing was short. "You don't smell gas," he said. "No one smells gas. Natural gas has no odor." Chloe turned to look at him. "They add something to it. Mercaptan. It smells like rotten eggs. They put it there so you can detect it, because otherwise you'd die without ever knowing." He breathed out. You didn't smell it because you've lived here for 3 years. That valve has been leaking for a long time. Slowly, your nose got used to it. It's called olfactory adaptation. You stop registering the smell when it never changes. He turned his head and looked at her, and beneath the streetlight, his eyes had no color at all. You've breathed it every night for 3 years, and you didn't know because you had nothing to compare it to. I've only been here 4 days. Chloe sat on the frozen steps at 4 o'clock in the morning, beside a man who had just kicked down a door with 3 bullet holes in his body. And she thought about 3 years, about all the mornings she had awakened with a headache and blamed it on lack of sleep. About Mrs. Frank, who forgot her keys, who forgot she was wearing her nightgown, whom everyone in the building had decided was confused. She isn't senile, Chloe said slowly. Silver said nothing. He didn't need to. Dwight Corliss arrived at 7 o'clock in the morning in his white truck, and he didn't ask whether anyone was all right. He looked at the splintered door of apartment 2C and began there. Who did this? Who kicked in my door? Mrs. Frank sat on the front steps wrapped in a blanket, and Corliss pointed at her. You again. I already told your son. You can't take care of yourself anymore. You leave the stove burning, you forget to lock your door, and now you've damaged my property. He turned toward the others standing outside, 6 people, everyone from the second floor, all of them cold and all of them silent. And I'm telling every one of you right now, if this turns into a big problem, I'll shut down this entire floor. I don't need this trouble. Anyone who doesn't like it can find somewhere else to live. Chloe looked down at her feet. That was what she always did. She looked down at her feet and waited for it to pass, and she wondered where she would go. And she had already begun calculating the security deposit on another place when Silver stepped forward. He didn't move quickly. He took 3 steps on one good leg and half of another, then stopped about 5 feet from Corliss, and when he opened his mouth, Chloe didn't recognize the voice that came out. It was low. It was slow. It was no louder than ordinary conversation, and that was why the entire sidewalk fell silent. The stove wasn't burning, Silver said. The shut-off valve behind it is broken. It leaks when the stove is off. That isn't user error. That's defective equipment. Who are you? Do you know the laws of this state, Mr. Corliss? Corliss blinked. What? Rhode Island General Laws. Chapter 34, Section 18, Article 22. Silver recited it as though he were reading a street address. The Residential Landlord and Tenant Act. A landlord must keep all electrical, plumbing, heating, ventilation systems, and supplied appliances in safe working condition. Not when it's convenient. Safe working condition, he tilted his head very slightly. Mrs. Frank submitted a written complaint about the odor in her apartment, October 17th. She submitted another on November 2nd. You didn't respond to either one. Chloe turned toward Mrs. Frank and the old woman nodded, a very small nod, and Chloe felt something inside her chest crack open. Corliss gave a short laugh. She's confused. She told me she could smell all kinds of things. She smelled mercaptan, Silver said. She was right. You received a written warning 3 months ago, and you chose to do nothing. That's no longer negligence. It has another name. Corliss started to speak, and Silver didn't let him. But you aren't afraid of court, he said. I know you aren't afraid of court. A case takes 2 years, and you have a lawyer, and this old woman doesn't. You've already done the calculation. He let a moment pass. You're afraid of the list. Something changed on Corliss's face. Because if I call the city inspector's office this morning and put this building on the inspection schedule, Silver said, they'll come because of the valve. And while they're here, they'll find 12 other things. The fire escape, the smoke detectors, the back staircase, the electrical panel in the basement that I've already seen. He didn't emphasize a single word. And once this building is on the list, it stays on the list. Every other building you own follows it there. That isn't a lawsuit. That's a schedule. Corliss went pale. He stood there with his Yuzhivki in one hand and said nothing for 8 seconds, and Chloe counted every one of them, and she watched a man realize what he was standing in front of. I'll send someone to fix it, he said. Today, the entire system. The whole building. With a signed inspection certificate, fine, and 3 months without rent for everyone on this floor. Corliss looked up. What? 3 years, Silver said. They've been breathing that for 3 years, and that was when Chloe stepped forward. She didn't think. She placed her hand around his wrist and said, That's enough. Silver stopped. She felt it beneath her fingers, the way his entire body had been drawn tight, and then suddenly wasn't. He turned his head and looked down at her hand, then up at her face, and there was something on his features that Chloe had never seen before. Surprise. He was surprised that he had stopped. And Chloe, standing on the frozen Straßenquai with 3 fingers resting against a stranger's wrist, was every bit as surprised as he was. That evening, she changed his bandages for the last time. He sat in the chair beneath the kitchen light while she knelt beside him, peeled away the gauze, and stopped. All 3 wounds had closed. There was no pus, no red streak spreading outward, and the stitches had begun to pull tight because the skin beneath them was drawing itself back together. 6 days. She had prepared for infection. She had prepared herself to argue with him about going to the hospital. "You never made a sound," she said. "Not when I stitched you. Not when you kicked in that door." Silver looked down, because it wasn't the first time. Then he did something Chloe hadn't prepared for at all. He pulled his shirt over his head, slowly, using his right hand, and let it fall to the floor, and he sat there beneath the 60-watt bulb in her kitchen. Chloe didn't look away. She counted. She didn't know was Saikita, only that if she didn't, she would have to feel something, and she wasn't ready. A long scar beneath the ribs on his right side, old and white, with smooth edges, made by a knife. A puckered round mark on the outside of his thigh, about 8 inches above the bullet wound from that week. A scar on his lower back that she could see only half of. One on his forearm that had healed crooked, as though no one had stitched it at all. One on his left shoulder, round, small, and deep. And Chloe looked at that one longer than the others because she knew what it was. The end of a cigarette, not one. 3, arranged in a triangle, evenly spaced, and it was the precision that made her cold, because accidents weren't precise. Someone had taken their time. She counted them all, 11. She sat on her kitchen floor and said nothing. She didn't say, "Poor you." She didn't ask who had done this. She had lived below other people for long enough to know that such questions were often asked to satisfy the person asking them. She remained silent and let her eyes move across those 11 places as though they were pages in a book, and then she asked the only thing she truly wanted to know. "Which one hurt the most?" Silver didn't answer. The radiator coughed. The neighbors changed the channel. She thought she had asked the rat the wrong question and was about to take it back when he spoke. "None of them." She looked up. He was staring at something on the wall. "That's the problem," he said. Chloe sat on the floor and understood that no one had ever asked him that before. It wasn't that no one had known. No one had asked. People looked at those 11 scars and wondered what kind of man he was. No one had ever wondered what they had felt like. She lifted her hand and placed 2 fingers against the burn on his shoulder, very gently, and he didn't move, and the air in the kitchen changed. He turned his head. They were close enough that she could hear him breathing. For 3 seconds, perhaps 4, there was nothing else in the room but that. Then he raised his hand and closed it around her wrist, not tightly, and removed her fingers from his shoulder. "No," he said. Chloe pulled her hand back so quickly that her elbow struck the leg of the chair. "Not like that," he said. "Not when I don't know what I'm bringing into your home." She stood. Her face burned. She began gathering the gauze and bandages, and she did it with great care. "Chloe," she didn't turn around. "You gave me 6 days," he said. 6 days was more than I had any right to. The next morning, she woke at 6 o'clock, and the mattress was empty. The blanket had been folded. 4 square corners, straight edges, placed at the foot of the mattress. The chipped cup had been washed and turned upside down on the rack. There was a sheet of paper on the dining table. Chloe picked it up, and her hands went cold. The handwriting was small, even slanting to the right, written with the pencil she kept in a jar. It listed her 4 debts by interest rate, from highest to lowest. It gave the exact amount she needed to pay toward each one every month to be free of them within 22 months. It included the hospital bill, and beside it were 3 words, open to negotiation. At the bottom was a name, a telephone number, and a single line of explanation. Bankruptcy attorney. Free for low-income clients. Say someone referred you. There was no signature, no goodbye. Chloe stood in her apartment at 6 o'clock in the morning holding that sheet of paper, and the room had never felt so large. 3 days passed and nothing happened, and that was the worst part. Chloe went to work. Chloe polished 32 brass doorknobs. Chloe came home and cooked for 1 person and ate alone, and she left the mattress exactly where it was on the living room floor, because she couldn't find a reason to drag it back to the bed. On the second day, she called the number on the sheet of paper. The attorney gave her an appointment. Chloe hung up and sat in the chair for 40 minutes. By the third day, the storm arrived. It had been forecast all week, and by afternoon the state of Rhode Island had shut down. Roads closed to traffic, schools closed, and Chloe stood by the window, listening to the sound wind made when it became strong enough to turn into a thing of its own, rather than weather. 4 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. Wind gusts of 60 miles an hour. The radio said the thing the radio always said, that exposed skin could freeze in 10 minutes. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about the 3 stitches beneath his collarbone and the 4 in his thigh, and she wondered how long they would hold at 4 degrees below zero. At 11 o'clock that night, she put on the heaviest coat she owned and went outside. The wind nearly knocked her down at the door. There was no one on the street. Not a single car. The streetlights stood in snow blowing sideways, and the city looked like something someone had abandoned. She walked a mile and a half back, along the same route, where she had pushed that cart 9 days earlier, and at the end she turned into the alley behind Hollis' house, and she stood there with snow striking her face, and looked, empty. She didn't know what she had expected. She stood in that alley for 3 minutes and felt foolish in an entirely new way, and then she turned back. She walked the length of Manton Street. She cut across Chalkstone Street, and she passed St. Michael Church. 2 blocks from her apartment, the gray stone church she had walked past twice a day for 3 years and had never entered, and someone was sitting on the steps beneath the archway. Chloe stopped. He was seated in the corner, where the stone roof blocked the wind, his back against a column, his knees drawn up. His coat was the old one she had taken from the charity bin in the basement. Snow had gathered on his shoulders. He wasn't asleep. She stood at the foot of the steps and had to shout over the wind. "What are you doing here?" Silver turned his head. It took a moment for his eyes to focus. "Waiting," he said. Chloe stood there. Snow struck the back of her neck. She waited for the rest of the sentence, and it didn't come for about 3 seconds, and then it did. Just in case. She didn't ask in case of what. She knew. That was what took her breath away, not the wind. 2 blocks. He had been gone 3 days, and he had gone 2 blocks. He could have gone anywhere. He knew how to speak to a man like Dwight Corliss until that man turned white. He understood interest rates and state law and the sound a broken valve made. A man like that didn't lie on church steps at 4 degrees below zero, unless he was waiting for a door to open. "You'll die out here," she said. He didn't argue. He didn't say he'd endured worse, though she knew he had endured worse. She had counted the proof. He only looked at her, and the snow blew between them, and Chloe understood that he wouldn't ask. He would sit there until she said something, or until morning came, whichever happened first, and he wouldn't ask her even once. She climbed 2 steps. "Come home with me," she said. He didn't move. "Only until the storm is over." Silver looked at her for a long time, long enough for her to feel every gust of wind. Then he braced one hand against the column and stood, and she saw how much it cost him, and she didn't offer her hand because she knew he wouldn't take it. "Only until the storm is over," he said. They walked the 2 blocks through the wind without speaking. At the building entrance, she had to use both hands to pull the door open. On the stairs, he had to stop at the 11th step, and when Chloe put the key into the lock of her apartment, her hand was trembling and she told herself it was because of the cold. She boiled water. She handed him the chipped cup, and he took it in both hands without any hesitation this time, and they sat in the kitchen listening to the wind batter the windows. She changed his bandages because the snow had soaked through his coat. Everything was still closed. Nothing had gotten worse. When she finished, she didn't stand up right away, and he didn't move, and Chloe realized that both of them were waiting for the other to pull away, and neither of them did. She looked up. Silver was watching her. "I'm going to stand, and I'm going to walk toward you," he said. "If you say no, I'll sit back down." Chloe said nothing. He stood. He took 2 steps and stopped about 1.5 feet away from her, and she had to tilt her head back to look at him, and she could hear her heart pounding in her ears. "I'm going to touch your face," he said. "If you say no, I won't touch you." She stood there. She didn't say no. His hand settled against her cheek, his thumb resting on her cheekbone, and it was cold and heavy and perfectly still. "Say no," he blinked. "What? Say no? Now try it." She opened her mouth, and nothing came out. She was 27 years old, and she had said to every extra shift, every humiliation, every hand that pointed to the place where she was expected to kneel and scrub. And she had stood before that bathroom mirror hundreds of evenings, practicing that word as though it were a foreign language, and not once had it ever left her mouth. His hand remained where it was. It didn't move closer. It didn't pull away. It waited. No, she whispered. He removed his hand to his immediately. He stepped back, slipped both hands into his pockets, and gave one small nod. Good, he said. Now you know you can do it. And Chloe stood in the middle of her kitchen, and something broke open inside her chest, not painfully, but as the opposite of pain, the feeling of something that had been clenched tight for 27 years finally loosening by a fraction of an inch. She looked at the man who had just stepped back, truly stepped back. He wasn't angry. He didn't ask again. He didn't make her pay for one word. She stepped forward, seized the collar of his shirt with both hands, and pulled him down to her. He touched her like a man disarming something, slowly, with all of his attention, and he asked before every time, and every time she was able to answer. At some point in the darkness he said her name, Chloe, not girl, not her, Hale. Her whole name, both syllables spoken clearly as though it mattered. And she lay in the darkness and counted backward, and realized that no one in that house had called her by her proper name in 5 years. Perry Lund called her Hale, or called her girl. The daughter, the one who wore silk gloves, had never called her anything at all. She only said her, "Where is she? Tell her to clean it again," and she said it directly in front of Chloe as though Chloe were a chair. 5 years. Chloe lay perfectly still and let that truth pass through her. The next morning, the storm still hadn't ended. She woke and found him already awake, sitting beside the window and looking outside. He sat so motionless that for a moment she thought he had fallen asleep sitting up. There was something in the way he held himself that kept her from calling to him. She remained still and watched his back, and she didn't know why she felt as though she were looking at a stranger. Then he turned and said good morning, and everything became normal again. She made coffee. She handed him the cup. He took it immediately. "The forest says there's a storm coming," she said dead. And she heard her own voice, and she knew exactly what she was doing, and she couldn't stop herself by the end of the week. It might be worse than this one. Silver took a sip. He looked out the window at the white city where nothing moved. "Is that so?" he said. 17 days passed that way. Chloe had 2 lives, and she carried them the way a person carried 2 buckets of water, carefully, never letting either one spill into the other. From 7:15 until 11 o'clock, she was Hale, the one who cleaned, the one who kept close to the walls, the one who knew exactly which corner of a room to stand in so no one would have to see her. From 11 o'clock onward, she was Chloe. She came home and there was someone in the kitchen, someone who knew what she bought, what she ate, how much she owed, and to whom, and that person didn't look down when she entered the room. She never told him where she worked. He never asked. She thought it was discretion. Day 24 was the fundraiser. Hollis House was blazing with light from 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and Perry Lund called all 6 members of the service staff into the kitchen and read out the rules. The list Chloe had known by heart since her first year. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't pass between 2 people who are talking. If you spill something, apologize once, then clean it up. 40 guests, candles, a string quartet in the corner. The Ashgrove daughter stood at the entrance greeting each person, 34 years old, wearing a gray dress and the silk gloves she always wore inside the house. And when Chloe passed with a tray of wine, the woman stepped side to side to let her through without pausing her conversation and without ever looking down. Chloe was used to it. It wasn't contempt. Contempt required people to see each other first. At 7:40, a silver-haired man in a blue suit was telling a story with both hands when he turned and struck Chloe's tray with his elbow. A glass of red wine fell onto the carpet. Chloe was on her knees before it touched the floor. For God's sake, he stepped back and looked down at the leg of his trousers. "Were you even watching?" "I'm sorry, sir. This is a Persian rug. Do you have any idea what this costs?" His voice wasn't quiet. The next room could hear him. The string quartet kept playing, but the nearby conversations had gone silent. "I'm sorry, sir," Chloe said again, and she took out a cloth and began blotting the stain. "These people aren't taught anything," he said to the person beside him, without lowering his voice, as though she had no ears. "They hire anyone now, no training. No standards. 40 people were in that room." Chloe counted them later when she was lying in bed unable to sleep, and she remembered that she had counted them in the moment too, because that was what she always did. 40 people, and the woman in silk gloves stood about 13 feet away, and not one person said a single word. Not because they were cruel, because they didn't see anything happening. Nothing was happening in that room at all. Only a glass falling and a stain being wiped away. Chloe finished cleaning it. She stood. She apologized a third time and left the room carrying the tray, and she didn't allow her face to show anything. In the back hallway beside the kitchen door, someone stopped her. He was a driver. She had seen him a few times and standing beside the car, 29 years old. His face still young beneath the suit. Tobias, someone had called him. He held out a handful of paper towels. "You should wipe your hands, there's wine on them." Chloe looked down. Her hands were red and sticky. "Thank you," he didn't leave. He stood there awkwardly, then said the thing he had been thinking about while walking from the sitting room to the hallway. That man was talking nonsense. Everyone saw him turn around. He shrugged. "I just wanted to say that. Don't let them make you small." Chloe stood frozen in the hallway. He nodded, embarrassed by his own words, then went out through the door. Chloe walked into the laundry room. She closed the door. She stood among the stacks of bed linens, the turning dryers, and the smell of industrial detergent. And then she folded over, bracing both hands against the washing machine, and cried. Not because of the man in the blue suit. Not because of the 40 people. Because a 29-year-old boy had just handed her paper towels and spoken the same sentence her mother had needed 21 seconds to say, a stranger, in a hallway. 3 weeks earlier, she had heard those words from a woman paralyzed on one side, and now she had heard them from a young driver, and neither time had she heard them from anyone inside that room, because no one in that room knew she was there. 2 days later, Perry Lund was waiting for her by the back staircase. He had never waited for her anywhere. For 5 years he had called her name from other rooms, and now he was standing at the foot of the stairs at 11 o'clock, already wearing his overcoat, holding a newspaper folded into quarters. "Hale?" Chloe stopped. "Do you have 10 minutes?" He didn't wait for her answer. He walked out through the service door, and she followed, and in the backyard beneath the awning, he stood with his back to the wind and didn't hand her the newspaper right away. He held it in both hands. "I've seen you coming home late," he said. "I've seen you buying meals for 2. Chloe said nothing. "It isn't my business." "I know." He looked out over the dead lawn. "I've been telling myself for 2 weeks that it isn't my business." Then he handed her the newspaper. Chloe unfolded it, the Providence Journal. An edition from 3 weeks earlier. The front page photograph took up half the page. A man in a black suit stood on the steps of the federal courthouse, his hands outside his pockets, his head tilted slightly toward the person speaking to him. And the posture was so familiar that Chloe felt it in her bones before she could read a single word. The headline ran across the entire page. Indictment dismissed. Draven Company cleared for the 4th time. Beneath it was a 6-word caption. Michael Draven, chairman, leaves the courthouse. Chloe stood beneath the awning while the wind blew past her, and she didn't feel it. She read the article. She read very slowly, as though the words might change if she took enough time. The article described a 6-year federal investigation. It spoke of the harbor, 3 labor unions, and 2 private banks. It said that during those 6 years, 11 people connected to investigations targeting the company had disappeared or died. 3 of them had been federal witnesses. No one had been charged, not once. The final paragraph contained only one sentence, written by a journalist whose name Chloe didn't recognize. In 6 years, the prosecutor's office had never managed to bring a single case against Michael Draven before a jury. "Do you know him?" Perry asked. Chloe didn't answer. "I know him," Perry said. His voice changed on the word no. Chloe looked up and saw something she had never seen on that face in 5 years. "My younger brother worked at Pier 9, Perry said. "He was 39. He worked the night shift. He saw something he shouldn't have seen, and he was the kind of man who talked about the things he saw." He stopped and looked down at his hands. They found him in Narragansett Bay 6 weeks later. The police ruled it an accident. They wrote that he slipped. The wind tugged at the edge of the newspaper in Chloe's hands. "He didn't slip," Perry said. Then he drew a breath and recovered the dry voice he always used, and he said, "I don't know what you were doing. I don't want to know. I only thought you should have this." He went back inside. Chloe stood alone beneath the awning with the newspaper. She read the name again. Michael Draven. She thought about the 11 scars. She thought about a man who had read a stack of bills in 4 minutes and seen 6 months into her future. She thought about that voice on the sidewalk, low and slow, and the way Dwight Corliss had turned white without anyone touching him. She thought about what he had said in the kitchen. "I'm not a good man. Good men don't remember the things I remember." She folded the newspaper and stood there, intending to go home. Then she looked up. She was standing beneath the rear awning of Winston Ashgrove's house. About 23 feet away was the service entrance. About 33 feet beyond the service entrance was the alley. Beyond the alley there was nothing at all, because that alley was the backyard of this house. It belonged to this house. It was where this house threw away its garbage. And Chloe Hale stood motionless on the ice and felt her blood begin to slow. People didn't dump their enemies in their own backyard. They didn't do that. Unless they wanted someone to find them, she didn't go home. She went straight to the Providence Public Library on Empire Street and sat in the microfilm room for 4 hours. The librarian showed her how to use the machine. She began 6 years earlier and worked her way forward. Michael Draven, 37 years old, chairman of Draven Company, estimated fortune of roughly $400 million, a figure printed in an article about coastal property taxes, beside a photograph of a 14-room house in Watch Hill overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. She read about the harbor. She read about 3 labor unions that had voted the same way for 9 consecutive years. She read a long article in which 4 federal prosecutors gave interviews, and not one of them spoke a sentence with a clear subject. And then she found what she had been searching for without knowing she was searching for it. No criminal record. Not one. Not a single arrest. Not a single charge. 6 years of investigations, and this man was so clean that when she entered his name into the state court system, it returned a blank page. Chloe sat before the microfilm screen and understood that this was the most frightening thing she had found in all 4 hours. People weren't that clean. People were only that clean when someone was doing the cleaning. She printed 14 pages, $3.60. She went home. He was in the kitchen. There was the smell of onions. He was cooking, truly cooking, and the sight of it, a barefoot man standing in her kitchen stirring a pot, split something inside her in 2. She threw the stack of papers. It struck him in the chest, fell to the floor, and scattered, and the top page landed face up, and his own face looked up at him from the tile floor of her kitchen. He looked down, and Chloe saw it. Not shock, not confusion. She had already built the scene in her mind, the one in which he bent down, picked up the page, and understood nothing at all. But instead she saw the face of a man calculating. Half a second, then it was gone. "You lied to me," she said. "No, you stood there and I remembered the morning after the storm," he said. The kitchen went silent. The pot boiled. "What did you say?" I opened my eyes, and it all came back at once, 20 years. In about 4 seconds, he didn't move. He didn't come closer. You were asleep. I sat beside the window for 3 hours. Chloe remembered that back. She remembered lying still and thinking she was looking at a stranger. 17 days, she said. 17 days. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew exactly what would happen when I did. He looked at her. And I wanted more time to be the man you thought I was. Chloe leaned against the dining table because her legs no longer worked. She looked down at the floor, at that photograph, and she lifted a sentence from the article she had read 4 times beneath the microfilm light. "Perry Lund's younger brother," she said. "Pier 9. 6 years ago, he didn't ask who Perry Lund was. That was the first thing that made her cold. Did you do it?" He let a moment pass. "I didn't push him into the water," Chloe waited. "But I knew who did," he said, "and I did nothing." She opened her mouth, and no sound came out. "Do you want me to tell you which is worse?" And Chloe Hale, the woman who had practiced saying no to a mirror for 27 years, heard her voice tear itself free from her body. "Get out." It broke out of her. It shook the windows. The neighbors turned off their television. She stood in the middle of the kitchen with both fists clenched, screaming into the face of the most dangerous man in the state of Rhode Island. And she wasn't afraid. That was the most insane part. She wasn't afraid at all. Michael Draven didn't argue. He turned off the stove. He wiped his hands on a towel, folded the towel, and placed it on the edge of the sink. He took his coat. At the door, with one hand on the knob, he stopped. He didn't turn around. "You pulled me out of the garbage," he said. "You didn't ask whether I had money. You didn't ask what I had done. You didn't ask whether I was dangerous." She heard him draw a breath. "You asked my name. No one had asked me that in 20 years. Chloe said nothing. That's why I remembered," he said. "Not because the blow to my head stopped affecting me. A doctor would tell you that, and the doctor would be wrong." He turned the knob. "I began to want to remember. I wanted to remember so I could choose. The door closed. Chloe stood in her kitchen. The pot was still hot, making small ticking sounds as it cooled. 14 sheets of paper lay on the floor at her feet. She didn't pick them up. She stood there for a very long time, and then her telephone vibrated on the table. An unfamiliar number, a 401 area code. She watched it vibrate 3 times before answering, and she said nothing. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman. It was smooth and slow, and it sounded like someone smiling with only half her mouth. "Chloe," the voice said. "You did very well." Chloe didn't breathe. "We need to talk about your mother. The study at Hollis House was the only room in the mansion. Chloe was permitted to clean only on Tuesdays, and she had cleaned it 260 times without ever sitting down inside it." Delphine Ashgrove poured tea. She was still wearing her silk gloves. "Sit down," Chloe sat. "My father doesn't know you're here," Delphine said. "My father doesn't know many things. He's 61 years old, and he spent 40 years building a spotless name, and now he's afraid of that very name." She set down her teacup. "I didn't order him shot, his rivals did, but my security team had been monitoring their movements," Delphine said, as calmly as though she were explaining a clause in a contract. "When they dumped him in our alley at dawn, bleeding but still breathing, I saw the perfect opportunity. I had the camera footage erased so his men wouldn't find him, and I needed someone else, someone entirely invisible, to take him away and hide him. If we killed him, 5 other families would arrive in Providence within a week, and everything my father built would turn to ash. No one wants a war, Chloe. War is expensive and everyone loses." She tapped one finger against the tabletop, "But a company without its leader begins devouring itself. 6 months, perhaps 3, not another bullet required. We only needed him to disappear from himself." Chloe could hear the blood rushing in her ears. 3 bullets, Delphine said. Not one struck a fatal place. That wasn't luck. Then she said the thing Chloe would be with her for the rest of her life. "Why do you think your shift began at 7:15 that morning?" Chloe looked up. "Your shift was scheduled for 8 o'clock, Delphine said. "But after we spotted him on the cameras at dawn, I had Perry text you an urgent schedule change, claiming another maid was sick. You signed it, hurried in early, and you didn't ask a single question. You never ask." She lifted her teacup again. "There are 6 people working in this house. But I made one fatal mistake. I didn't realize Draven had already regained his memory weeks ago. He used his resources to turn my own driver, young Tobias, into his double agent. Tobias wasn't helping you out of pity, Chloe. He was working for Draven all along, waiting for the moment we moved against you. I've watched you for 5 years, Chloe. You're the most predictable thing in this house." Chloe sat perfectly still. "We needed him alive," Delphine said. "We needed him alive in a place we knew. And you brought him to exactly the right place, on exactly the right day, at exactly the right time." Chloe felt the room tilt. That alley hadn't been where someone discarded a man. It had been where someone delivered one. And she had been the receiving address. "How evil are you?" she heard herself ask, her voice hoarse. Delphine didn't answer. She opened a drawer, removed a file, and slid it across the desk. "Before you decide who the villain is," she said, "you should read this." Chloe opened it. A hospital bill, $40,000. Signed, died 5 years earlier. She knew this document. She had a copy in the drawer of her dining table. She turned and said the same amount, the same date. $40,000 paid in full for a patient named Nadine Hale. The payer wasn't Ashgrove Holdings. Chloe read the name 3 times before it entered her mind. "Draven Company, he paid first," Delphine said. 3 days before we did. We paid afterward. Recorded the amount as your debt, and you worked for 5 years to repay a debt that never existed." Chloe couldn't breathe. "You worked for me for nothing for 5 years, Delphine said. Because of a piece of paper." She took a sip of tea. "And before you decide he's your knight in shining armor, here's the rest. That year, Draven Company paid the hospital bills of 37 families in this county. 37. That's how he launders money, Chloe. Medical charity. No one audits kindness." Delphine set her cup down very gently. "He didn't even read your name." Chloe sat inside the room she had cleaned 260 times and felt all 5 years drain out of her body. Delphine slid another sheet of paper across the desk. A pen lay across it. "A statement," she said. "You'll say Michael Draven held you inside that apartment against your will, that he threatened your mother. You're the perfect witness, Chloe. A maid. No criminal record. No reason to lie. A jury will believe you before you've even opened your mouth." She touched the edge of the page with one gloved finger. Your mother needs surgery. $180,000. She doesn't qualify for Medicaid because you earn $668 a month above the limit. I know the number. I looked it up this morning. Chloe picked up the pen. It was heavy. The kind of pen people gave one another as gifts. She thought about the 3 seconds in the hallway at St. Brendan. She thought about the 21 seconds her mother had needed to speak 7 words. She put the pen down. Delphine's expression didn't change. Do you know what's funny? Chloe said. Her voice didn't tremble, and she was as surprised as anyone. I stood inside your house for 5 years. I cleaned this table. You never looked into my face even once. You said, "Where is she?" while I was standing right in front of you. She rose. He looked at me for 3 seconds inside a pile of garbage while he was dying. 3 seconds. She pushed the chair back into place. You can't buy me. Because you never looked at me long enough to know my price. She walked toward the door. Chloe. Delphine's voice remained soft. It didn't rise by even a single note. If you walk through that door, your mother dies. Chloe didn't turn around. They came at 7 o'clock in the evening. 2 men in gray suits. And they didn't break down the door. They knocked. The man on the left held out an identification card and a document bearing an official seal, and he said, "Miss Hale, you're a material witness in an ongoing investigation. We've been assigned to take you to a secure location." Chloe read the document. It had a case number. It bore a judge's signature. It said she had the right to call an attorney, and that she would be allowed to make the call once she arrived. Every word on that page was true, and the entire page was a lie, and Chloe understood within about 2 seconds that this was exactly what Delphine Ashgrove did. She didn't need knives. She had forms. Chloe went with them because she had no other choice. A black car waited at the curb, and the man behind the wheel was Tobias Greer. He said nothing when she got in. He drove. Chloe sat in the back seat between the 2 men, looking out the window as the city passed by, feeling as though she were being carried away like a box. Then she caught his eyes in the rearview mirror. There was no hesitation in his gaze, only a grim, quick calculation that didn't belong to a simple driver. "Draven sends his regards, Miss Hale," Tobias whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "The boss has been watching over you since the day he left your apartment." At the intersection of Allen Street and Cranston Street, the light turned red and the car stopped, and Tobias Greer did something no one inside the vehicle understood quickly enough. He unlocked the doors. He twisted around and opened the right rear door using the control beside the driver's seat, and he said, not loudly, almost normally, "Run, Mom." He pushed his phone through the gap between the seats. Chloe seized it, climbed out of the car and ran. She heard someone shouting behind her. She heard tires. She heard a car door slam. She didn't look back. She ran through 3 alleys and 1 parking lot and hid behind a dumpster for 10 minutes, and she didn't go back. 3 days later, she would read the proof report. 4 lines is on page 11, with no photograph. 29-year-old man killed in single vehicle accident on Allen Street. Police said another vehicle was involved. 4 lines. That was all Providence gave him. But that night, Chloe knew none of it, and she sat behind the dumpster with a stranger's phone trembling in her hand. And she remembered only one telephone number in the world. Number she had read, again and again on a sheet of paper, written in pencil until it had settled into her bones. She didn't call the bankruptcy attorney. She called the other number. The one on the final line with no name beside it. The phone rang once. 40 minutes later, she was standing at Pier 9. She didn't know why she had gone there. Perhaps because the voice on the other end had told her to. Black cars entered the pier from 2 directions, 6 of them, their headlights sweeping across the wet concrete, and people stepped out, 12 in all, and not one of them ran, and not one of them drew anything. That was what frightened Chloe most, the calm. Delphine Ashgrove was already there. She stood beside her car with 2 people, and she didn't look surprised. Michael Draven walked forward and stopped about 13 feet away from her. "You shot me," he said. "It was business. I respect that. No one moved." "You used her," he said. "That wasn't business. That was laziness. You looked across the entire house and chose the weakest person in the room, because you thought she would break." He let a moment pass. She didn't break. The blonde woman standing to his left opened a laptop on the hood of the car. Chloe watched her type. 90 seconds. "No more. Done," the woman said. 6 companies. Every debt held by Ashgrove Holdings has been purchased over the past 17 days. The bank freezes everything at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Her father will learn he's bankrupt through an automated call. Delphine said nothing. And the file on the 3 bullets reached the federal office this afternoon, Draven said. Anonymous. They'll contact you before the end of the week. He looked at her for a long time. I don't kill people, Miss Ashgrove, he said. I make them disappear through contracts. Chloe stood at the edge of the light and realized where she had heard those words before. It was what the entire city said about Winston Ashgrove. He had just returned them to her. Then everything ended as simply as turning off a switch. There were no gunshots. No one touched anyone. People began walking back toward their cars. And Chloe stood there trembling violently with both hands still dirty. And the silver-haired man stepped forward and handed Michael Draven a telephone. Boss. The council is waiting. 9 people. They need a decision about Pier 4 before midnight. Draven looked at the screen, and Chloe watched it happen. His shoulders changed. His jaw changed. Something withdrew from his body like water receding from the shore, and the man who had once stood in her kitchen and said, "Say no, try it," was no longer inside him. The blonde woman looked up. Her voice wasn't cruel. That was the worst part. It was only a logistical question. What about her? She heard everything. Michael Draven didn't turn around. He didn't look at Chloe. He lifted the phone to his ear. Take her home, he said. Handle the paperwork. Someone draped a blanket over her shoulders. Someone led her away. At the car door, Chloe looked back once. He didn't turn around. 3 lawyers arrived at 9 o'clock the next morning. They carried leather briefcases, called her Miss Hale, and spread documents across her dining table, that very same table. Sign here, initial in the margin. A confidentiality agreement. She wouldn't discuss, describe, or disclose anything in any form. Chloe read every word, slowly, because she had learned to do that from someone, and she wouldn't forget the lesson even if she wanted to. She signed. 3 days later, money appeared in her account. $200,000. The transfer note contained 3 words. Consulting services rendered. Chloe sat staring at the number on her phone screen for a long time, and she didn't feel relieved. She felt like a bill that had been paid. For 5 years she had been one line in someone's ledger, and now she was another, and payment had been made and the file had been closed. Her mother's surgery was scheduled that same week. No one explained why. Dr. Halloran called and said the cost had been taken care of, and confusion filled his voice, and Chloe didn't ask because she already knew. Nadine Hale woke after 7 hours. 3 days later her speech was clearer, not by much, but the 3-second pauses had shortened to 2. Chloe sat beside the bed and told her everything, every part of it. The hand in the garbage, the 3 bullets, the cassette tape and the fingers that refused to let go, the 11 scars, the gas valve, the $40,000, Delphine Ashgrove and her silk gloves, the black car and the 29-year-old driver, and the 4 lines on page 11, and the final words at Pier 9. Handle the paperwork. She spoke for 40 minutes, and her mother didn't interrupt once. When Chloe finished, Nadine looked at her daughter for a long time. Then she began, you, 2 seconds, save, 2 seconds, him, 2 seconds, because 2 seconds, you, 2 seconds, think, 2 seconds, you, 2 seconds, aren't, 2 seconds, worth, 2 seconds, saving. Chloe sat perfectly still. People, 2 seconds, like 2 seconds, you, 2 seconds, always 2 seconds, save, 2 seconds, 2 seconds. So 2 seconds, they, 2 seconds, don't. 2 seconds, have, 2 seconds, 2 seconds, look, 2 seconds, at, 2 seconds, themselves along the wall ticked. Someone's not put your cart along the hallway. I, 2 seconds, don't, seconds, you, 2 seconds, 2 seconds, save, 2 seconds, me, 2 seconds, Annie Moore, a very long pause, I, 2 seconds, knees, 2 seconds, you, 2 seconds, 2 seconds, live. Chloe said nothing. She bent down and rested her forehead against the edge of the bed, beside her mother's left hand, and she cried. Without making a sound. Her shoulders shook, and that hand settled on her hair. And outside in the hallway a cart rolled past, and it was the first time in 5 years that she had allowed herself to do that. Hollis House was listed for sale in the 3rd week. Chloe walked past it once, and the for sale sign stood in the dead lawn, and the windows were dark. The local newspaper published 3 articles about Winston Ashgrove and how a 60-year real estate empire had collapsed in 48 hours. His daughter was indicted the following month. Chloe didn't attend a single hearing. She didn't use the $200,000 to buy a house. She rented a storefront on Manton Street beside the discount chicken market, bought 4 used industrial washing machines and 2 dryers, and painted the walls white. She hired 3 people. All 3 were women, and all 3 had once walked through hallways where no one called their names, and Chloe paid them twice the Rhode Island minimum wage. She didn't become rich. She calculated, and she knew that with those wages she would only break even during the first 2 years. She did it because she knew the exact price of being unseen. She had paid it for 5 years. She named the laundromat Nadine's, and she practiced saying no to the customer who demanded that his laundry be washed a 3rd time for free, to the chemical supplier who raised the price in the middle of the contract. The first time, her voice trembled, and she had to say it twice. By the 4th time, it didn't, and every time the word left her mouth, clean and precise, she heard a voice in the darkness telling her to try saying it, and she had to turn away and wipe something for a few seconds. On the 51st day, she closed the shop at 7 o'clock in the evening. She turned off the lights, locked the door, and stood on the sidewalk, and snow began to fall. She hadn't meant to walk in that direction. Her feet went there on their own, down Manton Street, across the bridge, then the turn, and 20 minutes later, Chloe Hale stood at the mouth of the alley behind Hollis' house, while snow settled on her shoulders, the same filthy snow, the kind that half melted and then froze again into a nameless shade of gray. The house behind her was completely dark. The for sale sign leaned in the wind, and the dumpster was still there. It was smaller than she remembered, dirtier, nothing more than a metal box with a rusted lid in an alley no one ever used, and Chloe stood looking at it and wondered how something so ordinary could have changed everything. Then the snow stopped falling on her. She could still hear it falling all around her, onto the dumpster lid, onto the ice, but it no longer touched her. She turned around, a black umbrella. His hair had been cut short, a gray wool coat, clean in the way only money could make a person clean, and those eyes hadn't changed at all. "You're still here," he said. Chloe shrugged. "Yes, just in case." Something passed across his face. She didn't allow it to remain. "You called me paperwork," she said. "I know." He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain immediately. He only stood there and accepted it. Then he said that 9 people were listening to that call. "If I had looked at you, even for 1 second, you would have been dead by morning." Snow fell around the umbrella. "I spent 20 years teaching people that the only way to reach me was through something I cared about. I couldn't unteach that lesson in 30 seconds. Then why did you come now?" "Because I spent the past 23 days clearing everything out. 1 person at a time. There's no one left who can use you against me." He looked directly at her. "That isn't romantic, Chloe. I need you to understand exactly what it cost for me to stand here." She thought about the dollars and the 3 words in the transfer note. "And the money?" "I didn't buy you," he said. "I paid you. You saved my life, and you worked without pay for my enemy for 5 years because of a debt I had already settled. $200,000 is your salary. It's less than you deserved. You didn't even remember my name on that hospital bill." He didn't look away. "I know," he said. "That's the worst thing I ever did, and I don't even remember doing it. 37 families that year. I called it money laundering. You called it saving your mother's life. The same act," he breathed out. "I was right when I said I'm not a good man. I do good things for the wrong reasons, and that doesn't make me better. It only makes me lucky." Chloe stood still. "I still run Draven Company," he said. Last week I bankrupted a man because he lied to me, and I didn't lose a second of sleep over it. I haven't changed, Chloe. I didn't come here to tell you I had. Then what did you come here for?" He was silent for a long moment. "To tell you that for the past 23 days, every time I entered a room, I looked to see who was pouring the water, who was wiping the table, who was standing in the corner." His voice turned rough for the first time. "I had never done that before. I haven't become a better man. I've only begun to see other people, and I don't know how to go back." Chloe listened to the snow falling. "My mother told me not to let them make me small," she said. "She was right. Do you know what's funny?" She looked up. "You're the only person in my life who never made me feel small, even when you were the most dangerous man in the room." "He didn't plead," he asked. "I won't promise to become worthy of you. I won't promise that," he spoke slowly. "But I'll promise one thing. Every day you stay, you'll stay because you choose to. Not because of debt, not because of fear, not because you have nowhere else to go. You have money, you have work, you have your name on a sign. You can step out from beneath this umbrella right now, and I'll never come looking for you." A pause. "Say no, Chloe. Try it." She stood there for a long time. Snow fell around the umbrella without touching her. Then she said it clearly. Without stumbling, her voice steady as stone. No, his face fell. He gave one short nod and began to turn away. Chloe caught his wrist. "No to you leaving," she said. "I'm practicing. You taught me." He stood perfectly still, then he said, "You can call me Mike if you want to. I think I can bear it now." And she kissed him there, in that alley beside the rusted dumpster, on the dirtiest snow in Providence. There was nothing elegant about that alley, nothing beautiful about the dumpster, the gray snow, or the smell of wet metal. But this was the place where a woman the entire world had decided was invisible stopped and looked. The man no one dared meet in the eyes was finally seen, the girl no one noticed, and the man no one dared look at. And perhaps that is what this story wants to leave with us. That a person's dignity doesn't live in the balance of a bank account, in a title, or in where they stand inside a room. It lives in whether someone is willing to see them. Every day we pass dozens of people our eyes move over as though they were furniture. The cleaner in the building, the person making the coffee, the guard at the gate, the nurse working through the night. They have names. They have mothers lying in hospitals somewhere. They have again and again inside their heads and at 3 o'clock in the morning. And the smallest thing we can give them, something that doesn't cost a single cent, is to look into their eyes and call them by their name. What did you think of this story? Have you ever been the person standing in the corner, the one no one saw? Or have ever been the one who walked past without looking? Leave a comment below and tell us what you truly feel from the deepest place in your heart, because we sincerely want to listen. If this story touched you even a little, please subscribe to our channel, press the like button, and share it with someone you believe needs to hear it, so that each day you can find more moving and heartwarming stories like this one. We wish everyone watching this video abundant health, a joyful life, and peace in every day ahead. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you again in the next video.